Recently, a video went viral in the Yu-Gi-Oh community by Your Yu-Gi-Oh channel titled something along the lines of Yu-Gi-Oh led to my divorce. That's the basic premise of the video, and some people have already reacted to this. I know Farfa reacted to it, Moist Critical reacted to it. He himself is a casual TCG player, and obviously that headline is pretty eye-catching. But what I want to focus on here, my take isn't so much about the end result divorce, but more of the debate that, the author said he had with his wife. I'll go ahead and roll a short clip here so you can see what I'm talking about.
When I met this woman, I told her about my Yu-Gi-Oh stuff. She hated it. She didn't like it. She said that, hey, you could do something better with your life. You should go back to school. So you know what I did? Back in 2016, I sold all my equipment. I sold my YouTube channel. I sold all my camera stuff. I'm like, you know what? Maybe it is time to move on. Maybe it's time for me to do something better with my life. Not knowing that at that time, what I had was very special. At that time, something that I chose to do, YouTube, I had something going on. I had something that I completely gave up. I gave it up because someone said, hey, you know what? Maybe it is time to move on. You got to do something better with your life. There's got to be something more for your life. And I sold all my stuff for a woman. And she's no longer here. And this problem persists. Yes, YouTube is what I did for a living. It's how I paid my bills. And I was street performing also. How did I street perform? I just catch the bus 20 minutes down the street, played my horn, went home. I never needed a car. But when I met this woman, you have to go back to school. You have to exercise. You have to get your degree. You have to do something better with your life. Even though I explained to her, this is what I chose to do. A woman comes in your life and try to tell you the plan that you chose for your life is wrong.
So this is something that might have happened with you even, maybe you and your partner, you and your parents, you and your spouse's parents, whatever. One person is sort of saying, hey, drop the Yu-Gi-Oh, this is too much, this is consuming your life, this is a cringy hobby. And of course, the Yu-Gi-Oh player would counter with, well, I enjoy it. And, people from the TCG community, of course, have mostly supported Your Yu-Gi-Oh channel and his side of the story. Obviously, we're only hearing his side of the story. We're not hearing his ex-wife's side of the story, which is, his angle is like, hey, I'm enjoying this and I'm making enough money from doing content creation to pay the bills, which I believe, and that's all valid. But I think, his wife and, maybe whoever you've had this argument with, I think their perspective is also valid. And the reason that I think I'm kind of uniquely qualified to talk about this is because of the fact that obviously I was a very competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player at one point. It did kind of consume my life. And then I sort of quit, became successful with a quote unquote normal life. And now I've kind of come back to Yu-Gi-Oh a bit, right? Not the way I was before, but of course I'm still making content. So what I think is interesting here, and the reason why we often have debates in society about any sort of issue, is that often there are pros and cons or goals that need to be weighed against each other, where, you do one thing and it supports one goal but harms another goal. And the two goals here that are in conflict are, I think everyone wants to be happy and fulfilled and have enjoyable hobbies that they can do, right? That goes for pretty much all ages, genders. But I think everyone also wants to be financially secure. And, here I know Your Yu-Gi-Oh channel claims that hey, I get to do both. Isn't this great? Needless to say, I know as a content creator myself, it is very, very difficult to make a lot of money doing this. And even then, you're not really making money from Yu-Gi-Oh! You're making money from content creation that happens to be about Yu-Gi-Oh! And, not only does Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, the card cost money, but I think more importantly, if you focus your time on that as opposed to more important things, that often has like more of an indirect harm on your life goals. So I know from personal experience, I went to college my first year. I was very great at Yu-Gi-Oh that time. During my first year of college, I got first place in 2 back-to-back regionals, and then I dropped out of college. But then I took a couple years, of a break, and then came back. And then, the rest is history. This hopefully all has a happy ending. So, what I think is important to understand, and kind of what my life lesson was, because I've tried to make money from Yu-Gi-Oh from different angles, both the content creation side and like the buying and selling card side, which is a lot like selling Coke to pay for your Coke addiction, but it is what people do. And, what I've learned here, and, I remember how I felt at that time. There was a point in my life where I felt like Yu-Gi-Oh is like the one thing that I'm really good at. Right? Like, I'm good at other things, but Yu-Gi-Oh is like the one thing where I'm like top 1%, top 0.1%. So like, I've already invested so much time into this and I'm so good at it. It's sort of a sunk cost fallacy. But I think what's important to understand and what I've learned is, I retired from my job recently. For those who don't know, I was one of these early retirees. And at the time I quit my last job, I was making $180,000 a year. And I've actually ran the math, and I think that's roughly what the top Yu-Gi-Oh creators are making right now. I know maybe some people in the comments will say, no, maybe it's 250 or 300, or maybe it's only 150 or 120. I don't know. But what I've learned here, and what's important to understand, is I was making $180,000 a year as someone who was mediocre at my job. I was not a star player. I was a software developer, and on most of the teams I was on, I was probably one of the weaker people. If there were 5 developers on my team, probably 4 out of 5 of those developers were better than I was, and they were still paying me that much money. So what I kind of learned is that, being bottom 50% of software developers makes tremendously more money than being top 1% in Yu-Gi-Oh content creation, etc. And I'm going to play another clip here from one of my comedians that I like, Jimmy Yang. You might know him from Silicon Valley. And this is what his dad had to say to him about career choices.
I went to school to get an economics degree, because that was the easiest degree that can still appease my Asian parents. But then after I graduated, I didn't want to do econ or finance. So I went up to my dad. I was like, Dad, I don't want to do any of this. I want to go try and do stand-up. And he's like, what's a stand-up? You mean like a talk show? I was like, yeah, sure, talk show, whatever you want to call it, okay? But I want to go pursue my dreams. And he was like, no. Pursuing your dreams, how you become homeless. I was like, no, Dad, things are different now. We're in America, okay? In America, we're supposed to do what we love. He was like, no. Everyone does what they hate for money and use the money to do what they love.
Now, obviously, this conversation here is played up for comedic effect, but I actually think his dad's advice is very practical, which is that just go into whatever makes you a lot of money, and then you can use that money to kind of do whatever the hell you want. And that is what I did, and it worked for me. So, of course, I would endorse that, of course. But, when you hear from people that say, oh, do what you love, whether it's someone that's a movie star or, a successful comedian or even a successful streamer like Moist Critical, it's very easy for someone who is already tremendously successful doing what they love to just say, oh yeah, do what you love. There's a lot of survivorship bias there. We don't hear about all the people who really try to do what they love and then fail at it. My mom actually is friends with a couple where the husband was trying to get into acting his whole life, and now he's 70 and he still hasn't gotten into acting, right? Never made any money from it. That is a thing that happens. yeah, do what you love, but like have a backup plan and try to stay pragmatic. I think that is what I would endorse. So, my point here is that, if you're the type of person, say you consider yourself top 1% of Yu-Gi-Oh players, I guarantee there's also something else that you are very good at that will make you a lot more money. In fact, like, there's even hedge funds that hire poker players because they have the view that, like, hey, if you're really great at like analyzing risk and reward in a card game, you'd probably be very good at analyzing risk and reward in the equities markets too. So being good at games, like, it actually teaches you a lot of valuable skills, math, strategy, even to some extent like reading comprehension. And I just find it so hard to believe that, if you're top 1% in Yu-Gi-Oh, there isn't something else that you could do that would make you like a lot more money. You look at people like Patrick Hoban, great example. When he was at the top of his game, very clearly number one Yu-Gi-Oh player in North America. And as far as I know, he went on to then have a successful career in, I think he studied like political science, maybe got into business. Again, someone in the comments, if I'm wrong about that, you can correct me. But we have like plenty of examples of star Yu-Gi-Oh players who went on to be very successful in non-Yu-Gi-Oh related things. Whereas the number of people who have been able to make a living for themselves playing Yu-Gi-Oh is like, you can count them on one hand realistically. And it doesn't come with benefits. It's not necessarily a very secure job. Even if you're the number one Yu-Gi-Oh channel right now, you don't know how long that'll last. Your competition might get ahead of you, or you don't even know how long Yu-Gi-Oh will last. So I'm entirely supportive of people and their hobbies, but I don't think that should be like your game plan as far as career and success in real life. And again, like, the people that I think are endorsing that are either very, very successful in their hobbies, and therefore it's easy to say, well, it worked for me, so why shouldn't it work for everyone? Or they're biased because, well, I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player, so I think it's fine if other people want to play Yu-Gi-Oh. If the roles were reversed and, like, let's say, he had a college degree and sort of a successful, normal job that paid well, and like his wife was saying like, well, I'm really passionate about astrology and I want to be an astrology influencer on TikTok. And oh, look at this, I'm getting ad revenue from TikTok and it's enough to pay my half of the bills. Would he really have the same attitude? Again, I'm not like trying to shit on Yu-Gi-Oh players and I'm not trying to shit on astrologers. It's more of the fact that I think people should separate their career from their hobbies. Most people, again, yes, I understand there are those very, very rare people where it's like, oh yeah, I'm just best in the world so I can make money with this. Obviously, we can find examples of sports players, for example, right? Obviously, sports starts out as a hobby. You join a team in middle school and then all of a sudden you're LeBron James. I mean, it does happen. But again, like, the peak, at least with something like professional sports, you can make tens of millions of dollars a year doing it. Whereas like with Yu-Gi-Oh, you really can't. So I think you have to look at it from the perspective of, what's the reward? Like, if I am just best in the business at this, which with Yu-Gi-Oh, it's pretty small. And then you have to look at like, what are my alternatives, right? Like, if you're a professional basketball player, that doesn't necessarily mean you could like be professional at something else. Like, yes, I know there are people who are professional sports players, then after they retire, maybe they like get into sales or something and kind of use their image as a professional sports player to help them market products. Like, yeah, I know like that's a thing. You can kind of capitalize on that image. But again, that doesn't really like exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! But the thing is that if you're really good at Yu-Gi-Oh!, you're probably really good at other things. And I have actually known like a lot of people that are, very, very smart, very talented. And to some extent, I do think like your talents are wasted if you decide, yeah, I'm going to make Yu-Gi-Oh! My career. I think you could play Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot and it's totally fine, or whatever your hobby is, whether it's Magic the Gathering or, knitting or who knows what. I think it's totally fine to have hobbies. But I think, again, if we're thinking what works for the most people, right? What is something that we should be endorsing as a general rule? I think it should be keeping your career separate from your hobbies. So not saying that, the guy who runs Your Yu-Gi-Oh channel should have quit his channel or should have quit Yu-Gi-Oh, but again, without necessarily knowing him personally, I would agree with his wife's perspective that, hey, you should focus less on this, or at least augment it with other sources of income. Because, this particular guy, he didn't have a college degree, but as I've discussed with other people, say you have no skills, no experience, and you just decide, hey, I'm just going to start out as a cashier at Walmart, right? I'm going to get paid minimum wage being a cashier at Walmart, and I'm going to try to make the most of this. Well, say that Walmart has 20 cashiers, it's not going to be that hard to get promoted, right? Because most of the other people that you're working with don't have great work ethic. They're not super smart. So you just got to be the best, or not even the best. You got to be maybe top 5 out of Walmart's 20 cashiers, and then you can get promoted. And then after you get promoted, well, then you just have to do well there and get promoted again. And that can pretty much go on as long as you want. So my point is what's easier to do and what has a better reward associated with it? Being one of Walmart's top employees, or being one of the top Yu-Gi-Oh players. I know saying, hey, get a menial job at Walmart and work your way up. I know that's not sexy. I know that no one wants to hear that. But I think, again, if you're smart and you have good work ethic, you're more likely to find success doing that than you are trying to be the best Yu-Gi-Oh player and making money through content creation, endorsements, working at a card shop, whatever. So that's my opinion, and let me know if you agree with me or if you think I'm totally full of shit.